Hello there! Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and I hope you're enjoying your Christmas season and having the best time ever, meeting up with family and friends and doing lots and lots of celebrating, because we've got a great year ahead of us, I'm sure. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with part 2 of our story. My mother's gold Chevy rattled rather precariously down the long windy road that was riddled with large open gashes, along with the occasional pothole, of course, and tiny loose stones rattled against the undercarriage, and my mother's car almost shook, rather like an oversized tin rattle. Soon we came to the large cattle gate and the familiar rusty mailbox that had been a red one at one time and was hidden by a thatch of long grass that I knew belonged to Uncle Chester. My mother's car came to an abrupt and very sudden halt. She then climbed out of the car to open the cattle gate. It squeaked violently as she pushed it open. All of a sudden I caught a swift flash of something standing behind a tree watching us. The silhouette of a tall, lofty figure with ponderous, oversized shoulders and bright, gleaming yellow eyes. But no sooner had I seen it, it had all but vanished, and I wondered if I'd imagined it. Perhaps it had been a trick of the early morning light, I told myself persuasively, because the alternative seemed too radical a thought to contemplate or even entertain. I'd seen the figure of a gargantuan man-like beast covered in long flowing dark hair, but was that even remotely plausible, I wondered? If I'd mentioned my idiosyncratic outlandish observation to my mother, she'd have all but laughed at me, or told me I must be daydreaming. But deep down in my gut, a gnawing began, because I knew I'd seen that strange being. I was sure of it, and no, it hadn't been my imagination playing tricks on me. But I refused to give the fleeting encounter much thought, for the more I thought about it, the more bewildered I would ultimately become. We drove over the noisy cattle grid, down a 2-track driveway, where one side of the road stretched out into burgeoning groves of trees that went on forever, and I knew was substantial in girth and size. After a quarter of a mile, we finally reached Uncle Chester's double-storey 1900s square-shaped colonial farmhouse, with a steeply pitched grey gable roof and a protruding dormer. The main body of this prepossessing house was covered in shingles and painted white, while generous-sized bay windows with complementary attractive grey shutters gave the house both a formal but rarely relaxed appearance that made the farmhouse give you the sense of being far away from the suburban trappings of the city. The central front door with its impressive gold knocker was painted a gleaming white colour and covered with an arched canopy, with steps that led directly down to the front driveway, while there was a sweeping wraparound porch that hugged the rear of the property like a big, friendly, loving arm. It would seem that visitors to Uncle Chester's farm could easily park their cars along the red brick driveway, or under the awning of an open carport that my Uncle Chester had painstakingly erected himself, and alongside that was a garage that could support over 6 cars, but barely ever got used, as the family was using it for other forms of storage. The front yard looked pretty neat, with the lawn mown to absolute perfection, and the hedges around the house neatly trimmed by Uncle Chester himself, who really was very nifty with a pair of secateurs. On the right side of the house, framing the driveway, were wood groves of trees and penned fences where black and white Jersey cows were happily grazing rather leisurely in the field. In the distance you could see a selection of outbuildings and a distinctive red barn that stood out prominently against the lush green scenery. If you looked towards the left-hand side of the colonial farmhouse, you could see cornfields that stretched out for miles, that sometimes seemed rather like an eternity. My Uncle Chester used to say if you listened very carefully, you could actually hear the corn grow, but on several occasions when I had done just that, I had heard nothing at all. But I knew from bitter experience that getting lost in that field of corn was not something to be trifled with, for that had happened to me and my cousin 6 times, and had reduced the both of us to tears. Uncle Chester's family of 3 was very blessed to live a much more superior quality of life compared to our family, who lived so much more modestly. Uncle Chester's wife Charlotte came from plenty of money, and the picturesque, charming white colonial farmhouse had been gifted to the couple as a wedding present by Charlotte's own father, and over the years had become like the gift that kept on giving. Ever since Aunt Charlotte and Uncle Chester had moved into Smoky Glazed farmhouse, Uncle Chester had successfully managed the farm with efficient, very skilled hands, as if he had been proficiently farming his entire life, which was far from the truth. My Uncle Chester now owned cows, pigs, and grew corn, wheat, and sugar beets. My Aunt Charlotte had grown up on a dairy farm, so was raised drinking full cream milk, which she was convinced had made her both strong and healthy, and to look at, Aunt Charlotte certainly looked like a farmer's daughter. Her stature was strong, and she was very good at everything she did, from sewing to cooking, and not to mention the plethora of jobs needed around the farm. When Aunt Charlotte first met my Uncle Chester, she claimed it had been love at first sight. She was forever the perennial romantic. I knew when I first saw Chester at church on that lovely spring morning, after he'd smiled at me from behind the pew. When our eyes met, all but for a brief second, I might tell you, that he was the one for me, my aunt told my mother very proudly, with a bright, mischievous twinkle in her eyes. But you know what Chester was like. He was so painfully shy. I was the one who had to make all the advances and ask him out. Otherwise, I might very well have let him slip through my fingers, and I wasn't prepared to allow that to happen. That's true, my mother had confirmed. Growing up, my brother Chester would hardly say boo to a goose. He was so quiet and unassuming, but very protective of me, I might say. But you have certainly brought him out of his shell, Charlotte. Good on you, girl. As that, most would have said, especially my parents, was an impossible feat. Thank you, Coco, for saying that. But I rather think I have brought my husband out of his shell, she continued. Imagine my surprise when I discovered the city boy called Chester, who, of course, was your rather debonair brother, was studying accountancy, and had been nurturing secret aspirations of becoming a farmer one day, even though he didn't have the first clue on how you'd go about running a farm. When I told my dad that Chester was the one for me, at first he was bitterly disappointed, because he had hoped that I'd marry a farm boy, who'd grown up in the same manner and tradition as I had. So they were very sceptical that Chester could succeed in farming, for he had never worked with livestock, driven a tractor or grown crops a day in his life. My parents were exceedingly doubtful that he would be capable of undertaking such tumultuous challenges that farming so obviously invites. Let's just say Chester surprised my parents. So they both cordially welcomed him into the Becker family with open arms. My father said, "You found a good one there, Charlotte. He's definitely a keeper." It's true, my mother had chuckled. Chester is a keeper. I couldn't have said it better myself. I am so lucky to have a brother like him. When I was a little girl, although Chester was always so shy and demure, he was protective over me every time. It would seem Charlotte's father, Sid Decker, had taken Chester under his wing, like an apprentice, and taught him everything he needed to know on how to become a very good farmer, as it was all that Chester had ever wanted to do with his entire life. By the time Chester was 6 years old, he talked about having his own farmhouse and managing his own livestock, and even his own parents had told him that would never happen. But Chester refused to doubt this dream of his, and I think even his own parents were somewhat shell-shocked when they realized that his childhood dream had all but fully materialized in his adult life when he'd married a farm girl called Charlotte. It was almost as if it had been preordained for him to be a farmer from the very moment he was born. Charlotte's father, Sid Decker, described Uncle Chester as being a natural, instinctive farmer who knew what was what, rather like an indelible ancient memory inside him that he was drawing upon to guide him in his daily tasks, which he appeared to do so very seamlessly. Sid Decker, Chester's father-in-law, would say that in a previous life, Chester must have been a farmer. "I don't know what to say about that, man. I've never seen anything like it," he would say, nodding his head approvingly. "But Chester instinctively seems to know how to handle things on the farm, without being told what to do," he told my mother. "The first time Chester neutered 2 of my male pigs, that was a big test for me. I thought I was going to see a disaster play out before me, and Chester lose his grip on the knife and rush over to the corner of the barn to hurl up the contents of his stomach. But I saw nothing of the sort. Chester took me quite by surprise. He did the procedure so professionally, without even flinching. He was swift and efficient with the knife, and quick with using salt on the open wounds, and he didn't go all peaky or green at the gills like some do. After the procedure was complete, he didn't become affrighted or intimidated by the 2 male pigs he had neutered, that started screaming and running around the pen in quite the panic, until finally they calmed down, once the pain and shock had subsided. Chester handled that all so easily. He's also so great at milking the cows, and as far as managing our cantankerous bull Nicodemus, that most people are terribly afraid of. He even got that bull to trust him, which was a first, let me tell you, because as I know Nicodemus, he's one hell of a contrary bull. But for reasons I can't explain, he always seems drawn to Chester, who seems to have a special way with all the animals. And on one occasion I've even heard Chester talking to them, and that's the sign of a true farmer that is in touch with his livestock, because he treats them with care and affection. I have to say, at 9 years old, despite all the good things I'd heard about Uncle Chester's accomplishments as a proficient farmer, I could not imagine him as anything else. It was hard to believe, in my 9-year-old mind, that Uncle Chester had studied to be an accountant at one point in time. That seemed so incongruous to me, as he was way better at growing corn or looking after a herd of milking cows, or a sour old bull, than monotonously counting numbers all day long. And the idea of Uncle Chester being clean-shaven, wearing a formal pinstripe cotton shirt and tie, and sitting behind a desk in a stuffy, very dreary office, just made me smile, as such a laborious lifestyle would never have suited an outdoorsy man like Uncle Chester. So it seemed the hand of destiny really did play a role in giving Uncle Chester the life of his dreams. The sunshine had robustly broken through the pale blue sky on that prepossessing, rather pretty summer's morning in 1954, as my mother's gold Chevy rolled down Uncle Chester's perfectly paved red brick driveway. I guess we must have made quite a commotion on our arrival, but then again my mother's Chevy always seemed to bounce around the road rather precariously, when my mother was in the driver's side seat, that is, almost as if it had a mind of its own, and wanted to draw unwanted attention to itself. Having said that, I rather suspect this was down to my mother's abysmal driving. The white-polished front door of the colonial farmhouse swung abruptly open. I saw Uncle Chester standing there in the doorway. He was wearing his denim blue coveralls. His long bushy white beard trailed over the front of his chest, that made him look older than his years, and dare I say it, a little Father Christmassy. He watched my mother parking her gold Chevy in the driveway. Her car suddenly spluttered a little, had a bit of a hissy fit, and finally calmed down, as the engine began to relax, and the car came to a grinding halt. There was a puzzled expression written on Uncle Chester's face, as the 2 lines between his bushy white eyebrows knitted together. I was in no doubt that this impromptu visit of ours was not expected, and was probably not altogether welcome, as Uncle Chester and Aunt Charlotte were very busy people, and our intrusion on this unassuming Saturday morning would more than likely interfere with their daily routines, for life never ever comes to a standstill on a busy working farm, when there are always 101 things that need doing all at once. Uncle Chester sashayed out of the front door, and down the steps of the arched overhang. He walked towards us, swinging his arms backwards and forwards, in that self-assured manner, like a man in full control of his life, while he waited for us to get out of our Chevy. "Coco," said Uncle Chester, moving forward to greet my mother, while he cast a bright sunny smile my way, and gave me a cheeky wink. "What are you doing here? This is quite the surprise. You never told me the both of you were coming." "Don't just stand there like a lemon, Chester," said my mother. "Aren't you going to give your lovely sister a hug? Long time no see. I'd have thought you'd be very happy to see me, but you look a little, what's the word, uncertain. Have I interrupted your day or something?" Uncle Chester wrapped his arms affectionately around my mother, enveloping her in a big, wide, open hug. "Of course I'm happy to see you, sis. And you have not interrupted my morning. When am I not delighted to see you? What's up with you, Coco?" he said. "Don't tell me you've had another argument with Ambrose. Please don't tell me that is why you're here." My mother flushed. Her skin took on a rosy pink glow, and the way her skin coloured answered Uncle Chester's question for him better than words ever could. "Is it that obvious?" my mother asked, almost disappointed that Chester had figured out why we were both here at the farm. "Sometimes you can read me like a book, Chester. What can I say? It was a bad argument last night, a really bad one, and Ambrose laid into me hard. He really upset me with some of the things he was insinuating. Let's just say I've just had about as much of him as I can take at the moment." "How bad was this argument of yours?" asked Chester, concern now shadowing his face. "Bad enough for me to reconsider whether I still want to be married to Ambrose or not," said my mother nonchalantly, her terrifying words hitting my heart like a thunderbolt. My mother wasn't being serious, was she? Did Sally Turner have something to do with my mother choosing to become so irrationally biased, so desperately antagonistic towards my father? I tried to fight back the tears that were building up inside my eyes. Was that why me and my mother were here at Uncle Chester's farm? She was clandestinely planning to serve my father divorce papers. Please God, no, I prayed inwardly. My little heart fractured from the strain of hearing my mother's brutal confession. My mother continued, "Sometimes he can be so unreasonable, Chester. My best friend Sally Turner thinks I should leave him at once. She says he's making me miserable. But that's not true, you know. When we argue, of course I'm miserable. Who isn't miserable when they argue? But I love him, Chester. But let's just say he infuriates me half the time. He can make me so mad," said my mother, suddenly fisting her fingers together, as if she was getting ready for a boxing match with an invisible opponent. "But I don't really want to leave him. I'm exaggerating when I say that. But sometimes it feels good to just say it and let it out. Despite everything, I love the man." My mother's last words brought a calm to my heart, rather like a soft rainbow in the sky after a heavy storm. "Look, sis, I'm no marriage counsellor or anything, but don't be so quick to give up on your marriage. You and Ambrose are very good together. You love each other very much, and that's more than you can say for a lot of couples I know. Don't listen to the likes of Sally Turner. That spitefully vindictive woman has always been so damn jealous of the both of you. Why the hell you're still friends with that miserable old bag, God only knows. When we were kids, I vividly remember Sally Turner was always trying to undermine you. She was so jealous of you. If she had her way, she'd have been you. She envied you in every way. So word of advice, don't listen to a damn word that woman has to say. And don't you dare let her toxic advice poison your mind against Ambrose, or blindly disfigure your judgment, for that would be fool's gold indeed. I know you and Ambrose have your moments, but every couple has hiccups in their lives now and then. Me and Charlotte have had a few ourselves, but that should bring you closer together, not tear you apart. What were your arguments about with Ambrose?" "The usual," said my mother, hanging her head in shame, looking almost too self-conscious to meet Chester's piercing gaze, as Chester had eyes on him that could easily cut through bone, marrow, and sinew. "Don't look at me like that, Chester. It's most disturbing. Put it this way, we've been a little strapped for cash recently, you know. So many bills that need paying. They keep mounting up. Ambrose thinks I should be creatively bringing in some extra money in some way, while I watch over Bentley's charge. He thinks I should bake cookies or make jam to sell to the farm store in town. Imagine me doing that, Chester. I'm a hopeless cook." My mother let out a sarcastic, sardonic laugh. "I personally can't believe the audacity that Ambrose has. He can be so damn presumptuous, you know. He thinks I can magically wave my hands and make the sky rain down manna from heaven. I'm not God, for goodness sake. Nor was I created to turn out heavenly sponges like some of the women so frequently do at Bentley School. The last time I was there at a fete at the school, my cake was embarrassingly the one that no one dared to purchase, because it looked as if it had been flattened by a hamburger machine. I was so mad at him, Chester. I mean, can you blame me? It's absolutely exhausting being a full-time mother, you know. I don't think Ambrose knows the half of it. He's not home all day long to see what I do. He doesn't see how hard I actually work. Of course you work hard, Coco. I completely understand that. I don't doubt it for a second. Likewise, I can see how much Charlotte here does around the farm. If the truth be told, I couldn't manage without that wife of mine. I don't think you women get enough credit for the marvellous things you do in raising our children. Believe me, it's no walk in the park. As for raising a kid, Charlotte has certainly had her challenges with our Dougie from time to time, let me tell you. She makes being a mother look easy, but I know how hard she works. Dougie might only be 12 years old, but he does have his moments when he's very cantankerous. And let me tell you, I have a bull on the farm that is less bolshy than he is. I think we've got a lot to look forward to when Dougie becomes a teenager, said Uncle Chester, rolling his eyes in exasperation. Thanks, Chester, for saying all that. It makes me feel a whole lot better. Honestly, Ambrose is so damned unreasonable towards me. He's blaming me for all the bills that keep mounting up. But things are expensive, Chester, and Ambrose does not appreciate all that. He has no idea how expensive things are these days. You don't have to tell me all that, said Chester, nodding. I'm very glad we're pretty self-sufficient here on the farm, with our own milk, cream, cheese, eggs and vegetables always accessible to us. I do pity people that have to buy all their groceries from the store first-hand. It's not a bad idea to suggest Ambrose come shopping with you on one occasion, so he can see how pricey things are. It'll be a big wake-up call for him, I rather suspect. That's not a bad idea, Chester, said my mother reflectively. I might just take your salient advice on that one. It would certainly be an educational experience for my husband, I'm most sure. You do that, Coco. You'll be glad you did. If money is a problem, why doesn't Ambrose look for a better paying job, perhaps? Thank you, Chester, for saying that. You echo my sentiments exactly. I told Ambrose that myself, that he wasn't earning enough money, and he should find a better paying job. But that went down with him like a lead balloon, let me tell you. As you can imagine, he claims he's earning a great salary, but I beg to differ on that one. He genuinely thinks I spend far too much money, and that I'm the one that is being unduly extravagant. But I can't remember the last time I bought myself a pretty dress, or spent any money on myself or on anything frivolous at all, like other women so obviously do. I never go to the salon or the hairdresser, like most of my friends, because it's way too expensive. Quite frankly, I'm sick and tired of being blamed for all our financial problems. I'm managing things around the house as best as I can. Ambrose tends to make me feel as if I'm completely incompetent and useless both as a mother and as a housewife. It's so destroying, let me tell you, said my mother, tears of indignance spilling down her cheeks, while she hurriedly wiped them away, with an apologetic self-consciousness. Sis, for God's sake, don't you dare get upset about this. Why did you not tell me things were this bad? If you were struggling, sis, you only needed to ask me and Charlotte to help you out. We'd be more than happy to help you and give you the money you need to pay your bills and buy yourself a few nice things so you can treat yourself for a change. And it would seem a trip to the salon is long overdue for you. You deserve a little pampering, for goodness sake. It goes without saying that we don't expect you to pay us back. Families help each other out when times are tough. And what good is it to have money mounting up in your bank account if it doesn't get spent from time to time on useful and sometimes very frivolous things that make life a whole lot easier and far more pleasurable? We all deserve fruits from our labours, do we not? And I would like to think all the work on the farm is helping the two women I love best in the world, my sister and my wife. I'm not a charity case, Chester. I didn't come here to beg for your help. I came here because I need a break from that damn husband of mine. And I wondered if Bentley and me could possibly stay here for a few days, a week or so. We'll help around the farm as best as we can and make ourselves extremely useful. I can assure you of that. I'll inform Bentley's school that he's taken a few days off. It'll be great for him to enjoy some country air for a change. Both of us absolutely need it. I promise you, Chester, we won't want to get under your feet. But I believe a break for the both of us will do us the world of good. When my mother uttered those words, I knew why she had packed so many clothes into my suitcase. We were not staying here for the weekend, but an entire week it would seem. I knew Dad would be extremely upset about this. But of course you can stay here, as long as you like, sis, said Chester warmly, allowing a big smile to stretch itself across his sun-kissed face. He stepped forward to ruffle my curly dark brown hair affectionately. And how are you doing, Bentley? If you don't mind my saying so, you look as white as a sheet. A bit of sunshine will do you some good. We might get some colour into that skin of yours. I'm fine, Uncle Chester, I said. Where is Dougie? I asked eagerly, looking around the farm, as if half expecting to see my cousin charging ebulliently out of the front door, with the family 2 black Labradors tearing behind him, with their tails wagging profusely, while they let out a few excited barks. Come to think of it, I hadn't heard any signs of the dogs when my mother had parked her gold Chevy outside the farmhouse. Dougie was my 12-year-old cousin, and although he was 3 years my senior, we always seemed to get along swimmingly, and didn't allow the age difference between us to stop us having fun. I think given we both did not have other siblings in our families, we both looked upon each other as brothers more than cousins in a manner of speaking. Dougie is with Charlotte, and our 2 overexcited Labradors, Jasper and Rosie, collecting eggs from the chickens up at the barn, said Uncle Chester. Your aunt wants to make a creme caramel for dessert tonight, and she needs tons of eggs for the job. Your Aunt Charlotte and Dougie will be surprised to see we have 2 very welcome guests staying with us for a few days. I'm in no doubt Dougie will be glad of your company, Bentley. I'm sure he gets quite lonely out on the farm on his own. As for you, sis, I'm sure Charlotte will be more than happy to have the company of a good woman around the place. The 2 of you can have a lot of fun together, going shopping in town, perhaps, to look for a nice dress for you. Several more, I hope. Charlotte loves an excuse to go shopping. Maybe, Charlotte, it will teach you how to refine your bakery skills, he said teasingly to my mother, so that when you return home, maybe you'll be able to start your own bakery business. Uncle Chester paused for a moment as he tugged his white beard. You did tell Ambrose, I hope, you were coming here, he asked, looking quite worried for a second. You wouldn't not tell him something like that, would you, Coco? He might be extremely worried about your whereabouts. Well, not exactly. He was fast asleep at the time when I left. I didn't want to wake him up, did I? I knew he'd stop us from coming here. I was so mad at him, Chester, so I did the next best thing. I left him a note, which I pinned up on our refrigerator under the magnets there, telling him I was very upset about all our fighting and was staying with you for a few days, as I needed to think, and I would appreciate it if he gave me some space. Uncle Chester let out a sigh. I don't think he'll be best pleased that you sauntered off into the sunset like that, without so much as a bye or leave. It's not a kind thing to do, Coco. If Charlotte did the same thing to me, I would be most aggrieved, I hasten to say. It probably wasn't desperately kind of me, my mother agreed. But Ambrose knows that sometimes I do need my space. He's good like that. He understands when I'm overwhelmed and things get on top of me, I need a break, and that's why I'm here. I think some fresh country air will do me the world of good, and especially not thinking about those bills will help me to feel a lot more upbeat. Forget about all your bills, Coco, insisted Uncle Chester, waving his hand dismissively in the air. Consider them paid. I'll write you a nice big fat juicy cheque for you to take home with you. You're here for a few days, Coco, to thoroughly enjoy yourself, to let your hair down, and to be spoilt rotten by that wife of mine, who no doubt will take you shopping in town to buy you a whole new summer wardrobe, and to the salon, of course, to get a new hairdo. I don't want you worrying about a damn thing. Do you understand? My mother's face brightened. But how can I possibly accept handouts from you, Chester? It's not fair on you. I won't have it any other way, Uncle Chester insisted. You can come to me any time, Coco. I hope you know that. That's why I'm here, he said, embracing my mother in yet another warm hug. And for a moment my mother looked as if the dark, foreboding troubles of the world had been finally lifted off her shoulders. I don't know what I would do without you, Chester, she said, tearing up. I just don't know what to say about such kindness of yours. I don't deserve any of it. Don't say anything, sis. I'm glad to be of help, and of course you deserve it. As you can imagine, it initially had been alarming for me as a 9-year-old boy when I'd heard my mother talk to Uncle Chester about her relationship with my father with so much scepticism, even mentioning the divorce word, as if she was thinking of calling it a day on their relationship. But at least she did finally say to Uncle Chester that she really loved my father and wouldn't call it quits on their relationship, and I seriously hoped she meant every word of what she said. I knew, of course, there were kids at my school in Detroit whose parents were divorced, and their breakups had caused these friends of mine a great deal of distress. I even heard one of the boys' mothers telling my teacher that her son had started wetting his bed again, all because he was so desperately upset about his parents' breakup. I could completely relate to that, and was clandestinely glad I was not alone in wetting my bed, if I got grievously upset about something, which I was inclined to do. If my parents split up, I might also end up having accidents like that myself far too often. On one occasion, I'm embarrassed to admit that after a fierce fight my parents had had together in the living room, I'd woken up hours later to discover I'd wet myself. I'd been absolutely mortified by this discovery. I'd hidden the sheet and my pyjamas in the back of my closet in my shame, and subsequently clean forgotten about them. When my mother found them, I'd felt so desperately humiliated. I was 9 years old, and 9-year-old kids didn't wet their beds. How could I tell my mother that her going on, and all the bickering she was doing with my father had caused me undue distress, so much so that my bladder had failed me? What on earth is this, Bentley? My mother had said, staring down at my soaked pyjamas. And, of course, the saturated sheet. I found this at the back of the closet. She looked more than a little affronted by this. She held up the wet sheet and pyjamas in her hand that stank of ammonia and betrayed my dark secret. Did you wet yourself last night, Bentley? Look at me, she had demanded, her tone of voice revealing her indignant disgust. You're 9 years old, Bentley, for goodness sake. Why the hell are you wetting your bed? In my shame, I had been unable to look my mother directly in the eyes. Sorry, Mum, I blurted out, tears spilling down my cheeks. I thought you and Daddy were going to get a divorce. I heard you last night telling Dad you wanted to leave him for good, and it upset me. That's why I think it happened, I said, pointing to the soaked pyjamas in her hands. My mother looked aghast when I said that. Her cheeks coloured, and this time she was the one that looked ashamed. She dropped the pyjamas on the floor in a bundle and took me lovingly into her arms and began to pat my back very gently. You poor, poor thing, Bentley. I didn't know you overheard me last night. Why didn't you talk to me about this, love? The last thing me and your father want to do is to make you upset. Me and your father, we have the occasional arguments together. Sometimes we don't say what we mean at all. Even if I did mention the divorce word to your father, it doesn't mean I actually mean it. You know, sometimes adults make idle threats like that. I tend to argue with your father. It's very common with adults, you know. But it doesn't mean that I'm breaking up with him. Me and your father, we love each other very much. We get upset sometimes, but of course we love each other. And we're very happy together as a family. Surely you know that. But you're always fighting about money all the time, I complained. My mother had coloured again. You hear us fighting more than just last night? She asked inquiringly, as if the very idea that I knew what was going on in our house had never even occurred to her. Well, the walls are very thin, and you've got a loud voice, Mum. It carries. Oh, goodness gracious me, said my mother, running a hand through her ash-blonde curls. I had no idea you could hear everything I was saying, Bentley. But it mustn't upset you, love. As I was saying, adults often fight. And what they say they don't always mean. But you're worried about money, aren't you? You're always fighting about the bills. Oh, take no notice of your father and me, Bentley. We squabble all the time about money. A lot of adults worry about how they're going to pay the bills. But we'll get them paid, I promise you. You have nothing to worry your little head about. But what about Sally Turner? I really, really hate her, Mum, I said, unable to disguise the bitterness in my young voice. At this my mother looked quite taken aback and visibly shocked. That is not a nice thing to say about my best friend, said my mother. You should never talk about Sally Turner in that way. It's not kind. But she's horrible, Mummy. Really horrible. She's always telling you to leave Dad. I've heard the things she says to you when she comes for tea. She tells you that Dad isn't good for you. She tells you that your life would be so much better without him. She tells you that you should file for divorce. I've heard the things she says to you. I don't like her at all. She's a horrible, horrible person. She's not horrible, love. She just cares about me, that's all. But take no notice of the things she says, said my mother. Sally's been single all her life. She's never been married and never had any serious relationships with men, so she knows nothing about relationships. She's had issues with men all her life, doesn't particularly like them, which I suspect is why she doesn't like your father terribly much. So you're not going to leave Daddy then? Not even if Sally Turner tells you to? I asked my mother. Goodness gracious me, Bentley. The things that go on in that little head of yours. No wonder you've been wetting the sheets. Honestly, love, you worry about far too much. And most of the things you worry about are never going to happen. Everybody knows that as a fact. My mother began to rock me gently, almost as if I was a baby again. Honestly, I don't know what to say. All these wild conclusions you keep jumping to. Of course I'm not leaving your father. And as for Sally, well, I'm not going to listen to her, am I? What does she know about marriage? Anyway, I just want you not to worry about anything from now on, Bentley, so that at least we can have the sheets and pyjamas dry at night. But if you keep worrying, you're going to keep wetting them, are you not? So you won't listen to Sally Turner if she tells you to divorce Daddy then? But of course I won't listen to her, love. I adore your father, and we're not going to get divorced. I may say so in the heat of the moment, just to rile him up and get him upset. But the idea of getting divorced from your father is nonsensical, to say the least. So get that idea out of your head at once, my dear. So that's the end of part 2 of our story. Part 3 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.